I'm the guy they made sit in the corner because my shoes weren't expensive enough. The man they whispered about when they thought I couldn't hear, calling me the charity case, who somehow wandered into their world. They looked at my second-hand suit and decided I belonged with the help, not the guests. What they didn't know was that I had more money in my checking account than most of them would see in a lifetime. And tonight, at the most exclusive charity gala in Chicago, I was about to show them exactly who they'd been underestimating. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is David Chen, and 3 months ago, I was just another face in the crowd at Northwestern University's alumni networking events. Fresh out of a computer science PhD program, I'd spent the last 5 years buried in research labs and server rooms, building something that nobody understood yet. While my classmates were climbing corporate ladders and posting vacation photos from Europe, I was living in a studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant, eating ramen and pouring every spare dollar into developing what would eventually become the backbone of modern cloud security architecture. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, sitting on technology worth millions, maybe hundreds of millions, and I couldn't afford to replace the holes in my sneakers. But that was intentional. I'd learned early that the moment people know you have money, everything changes. They treat you differently, want things from you, see dollar signs instead of a person. So I kept quiet, lived small, and let my bank account grow, while my wardrobe stayed exactly the same. The invitation came through the alumni office, heavy cardstock, gold embossing, the kind of formal elegance that screams old money and older traditions. The Chicago Business Leaders' annual charity gala, hosted by the Morrison Foundation. Black tie required, donation suggested, networking encouraged. I almost threw it away. These kinds of events weren't for people like me. They were for the sons and daughters of industry titans, for trust fund kids who inherited their wealth instead of building it from scratch. But something made me keep it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the small, rebellious part of me that wanted to see how the other half lived. Or maybe it was because Sarah Morrison's name was listed as the event coordinator, and I remembered her from our undergraduate economics classes. She'd been kind then, before the family money and social expectations probably changed her. I figured it couldn't hurt to make an appearance, stay in the back, maybe catch up with a familiar face. The rental shop downtown had exactly one tuxedo in my size, and it showed its age. The fabric was slightly shiny from too many cleanings, the bow tie pre-tied and clip-on, the shoes scuffed leather that had seen better decades. The teenager behind the counter looked at me with barely concealed pity as he rang up the cheapest package they offered. I paid cash, ignored his expression, and walked out knowing I looked exactly like what I was trying not to be perceived as, someone pretending to belong in a world that wasn't mine. The Palmer House Hilton rose before me, like a monument to everything I wasn't. Valets in crisp uniforms directed luxury cars toward perfectly orchestrated chaos. Bentleys and Mercedes, sliding past Maseratis and Lamborghinis, like a automotive fashion show. I stood on the corner for 10 minutes, watching through the windows as men in perfectly tailored tuxedos and women in gowns that cost more than most people's rent glided through the marble lobby. Every instinct told me to turn around, go home, order takeout, and spend the evening debugging code like I usually did. Instead, I walked through those golden doors. The lobby hit me like a physical presence. Crystal chandeliers threw prismatic light across Italian marble floors, while flower arrangements the size of small trees perfumed the air with something expensive and subtle. A string quartet played in one corner, their music barely audible above the murmur of conversation and the soft click of designer heels on stone. Everyone moved with the confident ease of people who had never questioned whether they belonged somewhere. I found the registration table, staffed by 2 young women who looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. The first one, blonde with a smile that could have powered the chandeliers, looked up as I approached. Her eyes did a quick scan, taking in my rental tux and budget shoes, and something shifted in her expression. Not unfriendly, exactly, but cooler, more professional. "Name?" she asked, fingers poised over an iPad. "David Chen." She scrolled, frowned slightly, scrolled again. "I don't see you on the main guest list. Are you perhaps with the catering staff? They have a separate entrance around back." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Behind me, I could feel other guests arriving, the soft rustle of expensive fabric, the quiet confidence of people who never had to prove they belonged anywhere. Heat crept up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm on the alumni list, Northwestern University, class of 2018. She exchanged a glance with her colleague, a brunette, who had been pretending not to listen. "Oh, the alumni edition. Yes, here you are." She tapped the screen with one perfectly manicured nail. "That'll be table 47. She handed me a small card with my table number written in elegant script. As I walked away, I heard her whisper to her colleague, voice just loud enough to carry, "I guess they really are trying to diversify the guest list this year." The ballroom was a study in orchestrated luxury. Round tables draped in white linen filled the space, each centered with arrangements of white orchids and gold accents. At the far end, a stage was set for the evening's speakers, while along the sides, silent auction displays showcased everything from Caribbean vacation packages to original artwork. The lighting was soft, golden, designed to make everyone look their most attractive and sophisticated. I stood in the entrance, scanning the room for table 47, when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find Marcus Rivera, a guy I'd known peripherally in college. Unlike me, Marcus had embraced the networking side of business school, joining the right clubs, dating the right people, positioning himself for success in all the traditional ways. "David Chen. Man, I didn't expect to see you here." His smile was genuine, but there was surprise in his eyes as he took in my appearance. "You clean up nice though. That tux has definitely seen some action." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, well, you know me, never been much for fancy dress. Still buried in those computers, I bet. What are you working on these days? Still doing that security research thing?" "Something like that." Marcus nodded, already losing interest. His attention was caught by someone over my shoulder, someone whose presence made his posture straighten, and his voice shift to that particular tone people use when they spot opportunity. "Oh, perfect timing. David, you have to meet Jennifer Hartwell." "Jennifer, this is David Chen. We went to Northwestern together." I turned to find myself face to face with a woman who belonged in this room in ways I clearly didn't. Jennifer Hartwell was probably in her early 30s, with auburn hair swept into an elegant updo, and wearing a black gown that probably cost more than my rent for 6 months. Her jewelry was understated, but clearly expensive, the kind of pieces that whisper rather than shout about wealth. When she smiled, it was polite but distant, the expression of someone who had mastered the art of social interaction without emotional investment. "David," she said, extending a hand. "How lovely to meet you. What brings you to our little gathering?" There it was again, that subtle emphasis on "our," the gentle but unmistakable marking of territory. I shook her hand, noting the softness that came from a lifetime of manicures and moisturizing treatments. "Alumni invitation," I said simply. "Oh, how wonderful that they're including more diverse perspectives this year." Her tone was bright, encouraging, the voice of someone congratulating a child for participation rather than achievement. "And what field are you in?" "Technology. Software development." She nodded with the kind of polite interest reserved for subjects that held no personal relevance. "That must be fascinating. So important these days, all those computers and whatnot." She turned back to Marcus. "Speaking of technology, has your father made a decision about the Hartwell Industries digital transformation project?" Mother was asking. Just like that, I ceased to exist in the conversation. They moved into a discussion of business deals and family connections, their voices dropping to the intimate register reserved for people who shared the same social stratum. I stood there for another moment, invisible despite being right next to them, before quietly excusing myself. Table 47 was exactly where I expected it to be, tucked in the far corner near the service entrance, partially hidden behind a pillar. The other tables in the area were clearly the spillover seating, filled with what appeared to be junior employees from various companies, plus ones who didn't quite fit the main demographic, and a few people who, like me, had somehow obtained invitations, despite not belonging to the core social circle. My table mates were a mixed group. There was Janet, a middle-aged accountant, whose husband worked for one of the sponsor companies. Next to her sat Tom, a recent college graduate, whose internship supervisor had given him a ticket. Across from me was Maria, who introduced herself as a freelance photographer hired to document the event, but invited to sit during dinner service. The conversations were stilted, everyone aware that we were seated together, not because we had anything in common, but because we were the ones who didn't quite fit anywhere else. As the cocktail hour progressed, I watched the main floor of the ballroom fill with the kind of people who appeared in business magazines and society pages. They moved in established patterns, greeting each other with the familiarity of shared history and mutual benefit. Conversations flowed easily between charity board positions, vacation homes and business ventures. Every handshake seemed to carry weight, every introduction a potential opportunity. From my corner vantage point, I could see the head tables clearly. Table 1, positioned directly in front of the stage, held the Morrison family and their closest associates. Sarah Morrison sat with her back straight, every gesture controlled and elegant, transformed from the casual college student I remembered into someone who belonged completely in this rarefied environment. Her parents flanked her, both wearing the kind of confidence that comes from generations of wealth and influence. The surrounding tables were filled with the city's business elite. I recognized faces from newspaper articles and LinkedIn profiles, CEOs and board members, politicians and philanthropists. They laughed at each other's jokes with practiced timing, complimented each other's charitable work with genuine warmth, and discussed their children's achievements with the casual pride of people whose success was assumed rather than questioned. A server approached our table, carrying champagne flutes on a silver tray. When she reached me, she paused almost imperceptibly, her eyes taking in the same details everyone else had noticed. The slightly too large tux jacket, the shoes that didn't quite match the formality of the event, the general air of someone trying to fit into a space not designed for them. Champagne, sir.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She asked, her voice professionally neutral, but somehow different from how she'd addressed the others at the table. Thank you, I said, taking a glass. As she moved away, I caught the tail end of a conversation from the table next to ours. Two men in perfectly fitted tuxedos were discussing someone, their voices carrying just enough to be overheard. I don't understand why they insist on these diversity initiatives, one was saying. I mean, I'm all for charity, but there's a certain standard to maintain. It's the optics, his companion replied. The board thinks it looks good to have different types of people here. Though I have to say, some of them clearly don't understand the dress code. They both glanced in my direction, not directly, but with the peripheral awareness of people commenting on someone they assumed couldn't hear, or wouldn't matter if they did. The first man nodded toward my table. Did you see the fellow in the rental tux? Bless his heart for trying. But really, probably here on some kind of scholarship ticket, the second one added. Well, I suppose everyone deserves a chance to see how the other half lives. They moved on to other topics, but the words stayed with me. The casual dismissal, the assumption that I was there as some kind of charitable gesture, the certainty that I couldn't possibly belong among them. They weren't being malicious exactly. In their world, these distinctions were natural, obvious, the way things had always been and always would be. Dinner was announced, and the room began to settle into their assigned seats. From my corner table, I watched the choreographed elegance of the main floor. Servers appeared with synchronized precision, presenting course after course of food that was more art than sustenance. Wine flowed from bottles that probably cost more than most people's weekly paychecks. Conversation continued at its sophisticated hum, punctuated by laughter and the gentle clink of silver against china. At our table, the conversation was more subdued. Janet talked about her daughter's college applications. Tom asked careful questions about everyone's careers, clearly hoping to make useful connections. Maria shared stories about other events she'd photographed, describing the various social hierarchies she'd observed from behind her camera lens. Everyone was polite, pleasant, making the best of their shared exile. During the second course, Sarah Morrison stood to make welcoming remarks. She moved to the podium with the confidence of someone who had been public speaking since childhood, her voice carrying easily across the room without seeming to strain. She talked about the evening's charitable purpose, thanked the sponsors and major donors, and outlined the foundation's recent achievements. Tonight we celebrate not just our success in raising funds for children's education initiatives, but also our commitment to building a more inclusive community, she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. We're honored to have such a diverse group of supporters joining us, from longtime family friends to new faces who share our vision of opportunity for all. Her eyes found my corner of the room for just a moment, and I wondered if she remembered me. If she did, her expression didn't change. She smiled with the same warm professionalism she'd shown the rest of the room, then continued with her remarks about auction items and the evening's entertainment. As she spoke, I found myself studying not just her, but the entire scene. The way the lighting had been designed to flatter, the careful placement of flowers to create intimacy while maintaining grandeur, the subtle but unmistakable hierarchy reflected in everything from seating arrangements to service timing. It was a masterpiece of social engineering, a physical manifestation of invisible structures that determined who belonged and who merely attended. The main course arrived as Sarah returned to her seat. At table 1, I could see animated conversations, people leaning in to share observations or gossip, hands gesturing as they made points about business or politics. The energy was different there, more electric, full of the excitement that comes from being among peers who understand your references and share your assumptions about the world. One of the men I'd overheard earlier was now standing, moving between tables near the front of the room. He stopped at table 3, where a distinguished older woman was holding court. I watched as he leaned down to speak with her, saw her laugh at whatever he said, noticed how the conversation at that table shifted to include him naturally, seamlessly. This was networking in its purest form. I realized, not the awkward exchanges of business cards and elevator pitches that happened at professional mixers, but something more organic, more effortless. These people didn't network because they had to. They simply lived in a world where personal relationships and business opportunities were naturally intertwined, where a casual conversation at a charity dinner could lead to board appointments or investment opportunities, or introductions that changed careers. The auction began after dinner, with items displayed on screens around the room, while an auctioneer worked through lot after lot. A week in Tuscany went for $15,000. A private dinner prepared by a celebrity chef sold for $8,000. Original artwork, jewelry, experiences that most people would consider once-in-a-lifetime luxuries moved quickly and casually, purchased by people for whom such amounts represented discretionary spending rather than major financial decisions. From my table I watched the bidding with fascination. Paddle numbers flew up with casual confidence. People bid on items they clearly didn't need, purchasing them for the social statement as much as the charitable contribution. There was a rhythm to it, an understood protocol about when to bid aggressively and when to graciously withdraw, when to push for something you wanted and when to let someone else have their moment of generosity. At one point, a technology package came up for auction. Premium software licenses, consultation services and hardware that would have been useful for someone building a tech company. The auctioneer described it enthusiastically, emphasizing its value for anyone in the growing technology sector. I considered bidding, but something held me back. Maybe it was the awareness that any bid from table 47 would draw attention, marking me further as someone who didn't understand his place. Instead, I watched as the lot sold to someone from table 5, a man who looked like he'd never touched a computer in his life, but who bid with the confidence of someone accustomed to purchasing things he might someday find useful. The final price was 3 times what the package was actually worth, but that wasn't the point. The point was the public demonstration of wealth and charitable spirit, the social currency that came from being seen as generous and engaged. As the evening progressed, I found myself conducting a mental inventory of the room. Not just the obvious wealth, the jewelry and designer gowns and watches that cost more than cars, but the subtler indicators, the way people held themselves, the unconscious confidence that came from never having worried about money. The casual references to private schools and country clubs, to vacation homes and business deals, to a world where opportunity was inherited rather than earned. More than that, though, I was studying the social machinery itself, how conversations formed and dissolved, how information flowed, how decisions were made through subtle consensus rather than formal process. This wasn't just a charity dinner. It was a demonstration of how power actually worked, how the real business of the city got conducted in environments designed to feel social rather than professional. During the dessert course, a man from one of the front tables approached ours. He was probably in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of tan that comes from golf courses rather than manual labor. His tuxedo was clearly custom-tailored, and he moved with the easy authority of someone accustomed to being welcomed wherever he went. "Excuse me," he said, addressing our table generally, but focusing on me. "I couldn't help but notice you from across the room. You're not someone I recognize, and I know most of the regular supporters. I'm James Crawford, Crawford Industries." He extended his hand and I stood to shake it. "David Chen. David. And what brings you to our little gathering?" There was something in his tone, not unfriendly but evaluating. I could feel the attention of nearby tables shifting subtly in our direction, people becoming aware of the interaction without seeming to stare directly. "Alumni invitation," I said, the same answer I'd been giving all evening. "Our Northwestern, excellent school. And you're in technology." He nodded slowly, his eyes taking in the same details everyone else had noticed. "Technology. Well, that's certainly the future, isn't it? Always need young people who understand all those computers." He paused, then smiled. "Though I have to say it's refreshing to see someone from your generation who still appreciates formal events like this. So many young people these days don't seem to understand the importance of tradition, of dressing properly for the occasion." The condescension was so smooth, so wrapped in apparent compliments, that it took a moment to fully register. He wasn't being overtly rude. He was being kind, in the way that people are kind to children or pets, with affection that contains no expectation of equality or reciprocal respect. "I appreciate good craftsmanship," I said simply. "Excellent attitude. That's what we need more of." He glanced around the table, taking in my fellow outcasts with the same benevolent assessment. "Well, I hope you all enjoy the rest of the evening. It's so important to expose people to these kinds of experiences." As he walked away, I caught Maria's eye. She had been photographing events like this for years, and her expression told me she'd seen this exact interaction countless times before. The casual assessment, the polite condescension, the implicit message about who belonged and who was visiting. The evening was winding down, Coffee was served, along with small chocolates that probably cost more per piece than most people spent on an entire dessert. Speeches concluded with carefully orchestrated applause. People began the slow process of saying their goodbyes, exchanging contact information, making plans for future meetings that would happen in offices and clubs I would never see. From my corner table, I watched the social choreography of departure, air kisses and firm handshakes, invitations to lunch and promises to call, the easy intimacy of people who would see each other again soon in similar settings. Valet tickets were retrieved, coats were claimed, and the ballroom began to empty as luxury cars were summoned from wherever they'd been waiting. As I prepared to leave, I found myself standing near the auction display, looking at the items that hadn't sold. Among them was a small plaque recognizing major donors to the evening's cause. The names were familiar now, many of them from the head tables, families and companies that had contributed 5- and 6-figure sums. Below them in smaller text were the names of supporting donors, people who had given smaller amounts but were still considered significant contributors to the cause. My name, of course, was nowhere to be found. Standing there surrounded by the remnants of an evening designed to celebrate philanthropy and community, I felt the full weight of what I had witnessed. This wasn't really about charity, though money had certainly been raised for worthy causes. This was about something more fundamental, about the maintenance of social structures that determined who had access to power and who remained forever on the outside looking in. I walked toward the exit, past small groups still engaged in conversation, past servers clearing tables and collecting the debris of elegant dining. Near the door, I passed the registration table where the evening had begun. The blonde woman who had questioned my presence was packing up her materials, chatting with her colleague about their plans for the rest of the evening. As I walked by, she glanced up. "I hope you enjoyed your first Morrison Foundation event," she said, her smile professionally pleasant. "It's always nice to see new faces." "It was educational," I replied. "Wonderful. Well, perhaps we'll see you next year." The tone suggested that this was more politeness than expectation, a pleasant farewell to someone who had been tolerated for one evening, but shouldn't assume ongoing welcome. Outside, the Chicago night air was crisp and clean after the perfumed atmosphere of the ballroom. Valets were efficiently managing the departure of expensive cars, while those of us without premium vehicles waited for cabs or ride shares. I stood on the corner, watching Bentleys and Mercedes glide past, carrying their occupants back to lives I could only imagine. A few other people from the outer tables stood nearby, waiting for their own transportation. We didn't speak to each other, but there was a shared understanding in the air, the recognition of people who had been present at an event without being truly included in it. My phone buzzed with a notification that my ride had arrived. As I got into the back seat of the Honda Civic, I caught a glimpse of Sarah Morrison standing near the hotel entrance, surrounded by friends and family. She looked radiant in the warm glow of the building's lights, completely at home in her world of privilege and influence. As we drove through the Chicago streets, past neighborhoods that shifted from elegant to ordinary to struggling, I thought about the evening's revelations. I had come to observe, to see how the other half lived, and I had learned more than I'd expected. Not just about wealth and social status, but about the subtle mechanisms that maintained inequality, the polite but impermeable barriers that kept people in their designated places. The rental tuxedo suddenly felt heavy on my shoulders, a costume that had fooled no one and protected nothing. I had played the role they expected of me, the quiet outsider grateful for the opportunity to glimpse their world. I had accepted their casual dismissal, their condescending kindness, their assumption that I understood my place in their hierarchy. But what they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to discover, was that the quiet man in the rental tux had more money sitting in his bank accounts than most of their families had accumulated over generations. What they didn't know was that the technology I had developed, the boring computer work they dismissed so casually, was about to revolutionize cloud security for every major corporation in America. What they didn't know was that tomorrow everything would change. The next morning arrived with the kind of autumn crispness that made Chicago feel alive, but I barely noticed it. I sat in my studio apartment, still wearing yesterday's dress shirt, staring at my laptop screen where 3 different news alerts were competing for attention. The first was routine business news about quarterly earnings reports. The second was a profile of James Crawford, the man who had condescended to me so smoothly the night before, announcing his company's expansion into Southeast Asia. The third made my coffee taste bitter in my mouth. Morrison Foundation raises record $2.3 million for education initiative, read the headline accompanied by a photo from last night's gala. There was Sarah Morrison, radiant in her black gown, standing next to the auction display, while well-dressed donors smiled approvingly in the background. The article praised the foundation's commitment to inclusive fundraising while highlighting the generous contributions of Chicago's business elite. My name, predictably, appeared nowhere in the coverage. What struck me most wasn't the omission itself, but the casual way the story perpetuated the very assumptions I'd witnessed firsthand. The wealthy donors were quoted extensively, their philanthropic vision presented as both generous and naturally authoritative. The beneficiaries of their charity were described in grateful, humble terms, painted as deserving recipients rather than partners in addressing systemic issues. It was a perfect circle of narrative that reinforced who had the right to give and who was expected to receive. I closed the laptop and walked to the window overlooking Clark Street. Below, the morning rush was building momentum. People hurried past in their business attire, each carrying their own ambitions and struggles, most of them probably unaware that they lived in a city where charity galas raised millions, while reinforcing the very hierarchies that created the need for charity in the first place. My phone rang, breaking the philosophical spiral I was descending into. The caller ID showed Dr. Rebecca Martinez, my former thesis advisor and one of the few people who understood the true scope of what I'd been building over the past 5 years. "David, I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. Did you see the IBM announcement?" I hadn't. Rebecca's voice carried the particular excitement that came with witnessing something she'd predicted finally come to fruition. I pulled up my laptop again, fingers already moving toward the technology news sites. They're implementing enterprise-wide security architecture overhauls across their entire client base, she continued. The specifications they're requiring are almost identical to the frameworks we developed in your dissertation research. Almost identical, David. Do you understand what this means? I found the article she was referencing. IBM's announcement was buried in the business section, written in the kind of technical language that would mean nothing to most readers but everything to people in our field. They were mandating security protocols that matched exactly what I had been developing, patenting, and refining for the past 3 years. The market they were addressing was every major corporation in North America. The patents, I said, more to myself than to Rebecca. Exactly the patents. David, if even a fraction of IBM's client base implements these protocols, we're talking about licensing fees that could reach 8 figures annually. This isn't just validation of your research. This is economic transformation. I sank into my desk chair, phone pressed against my ear, trying to process what she was saying. For 5 years I had been methodically building something that most people couldn't understand, living in deliberate obscurity, while developing technology that would eventually become essential to modern business infrastructure. The recognition had always been theoretical, something that might happen someday if the market evolved in the right direction. That evolution had just been announced by one of the world's largest technology companies. There's more, Rebecca continued. I've been contacted by 3 different venture capital firms in the past week. Word is getting out about your work, and they're starting to understand the implications. One of them, Peterson Dynamics, wants to schedule a meeting. David, they're talking about acquisition offers that would make you independently wealthy overnight. Peterson Dynamics. I knew the name from business publications, one of those investment firms that specialized in identifying emerging technologies before they became mainstream. Their portfolio read like a prediction of future industry trends, companies they'd backed early that went on to reshape entire sectors of the economy. How much wealth are we talking about? I asked, though part of me was afraid of the answer. Conservative estimates start around 50 million. If the technology scales the way we think it will, we could be looking at hundreds of millions. David, you could literally buy and sell most of the people who were looking down on you last night. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. While James Crawford was condescending to me about young people understanding computers, while Sarah Morrison was introducing me as a diverse face in the crowd, while that registration blonde was assuming I worked in catering, I was sitting on intellectual property that would soon be worth more than their family foundations. But the realization brought something else with it, something darker and more complex than simple vindication. It brought the understanding that I had choices to make, and those choices would determine not just my financial future, but who I became as a person. Rebecca, I need some time to think about this. Of course you do, but David, don't think too long. The technology sector moves fast, and opportunities like this don't wait for us to feel ready. After I hung up, I spent the rest of the morning researching Peterson dynamics and their typical acquisition patterns. They were aggressive but fair, known for making offers that transformed individual inventors into major stakeholders in larger technology ecosystems. Their partners were the kind of people who appeared on business magazine covers, who gave keynote speeches at industry conferences, who moved seamlessly between corporate boardrooms and government advisory committees. They were, in other words, exactly the type of people who had dismissed me so casually the night before. By noon, I had made a decision that surprised me with its clarity. I wasn't going to call Peterson Dynamics immediately. Instead, I was going to do something that would give me more satisfaction than any acquisition offer could provide. I was going to attend another Morrison Foundation event. According to their website, the foundation hosted monthly networking mixers for young professionals, smaller gatherings designed to cultivate the next generation of philanthropic leadership. The next one was scheduled for Thursday evening at the Union League Club, one of Chicago's most exclusive private establishments. The dress code was business professional rather than black tie, the donation suggested rather than required, the atmosphere described as casual networking rather than formal fundraising. Perfect. I spent Tuesday shopping, but not in the way I had prepared for the gala. Instead of rental shops and discount stores, I visited the kind of establishments that existed in a parallel retail universe, places where salespeople assessed your potential rather than your appearance, where clothing was investment rather than costume. The first stop was Brooks Brothers on Michigan Avenue. I walked in wearing jeans and a Northwestern t-shirt, looking every bit the graduate student I had been until recently. The salesperson who approached me was professional but cautious, clearly trying to determine whether I was a serious customer or someone who had wandered in by mistake. I need a complete business wardrobe, I told him simply. Suits, shirts, shoes, accessories, quality pieces that will last. His demeanor shifted slightly, though he remained careful. Certainly, sir. What's your budget range? Whatever it costs to do it right. That was the magic phrase. Within minutes I was being measured for custom-tailored suits, shown fabrics that cost more per yard than most people spent on entire outfits, educated about the subtle differences between styles that would mark me as someone who understood quality, rather than someone trying to impress through obvious expense. The transformation took 3 days. On Wednesday, I visited an upscale barbershop, where they spent an hour perfecting a haircut that looked effortless but sophisticated. I purchased a watch that was elegant without being flashy, shoes that were handmade but understated, accessories that whispered rather than shouted about quality and taste. More importantly, I spent those 3 days studying, not technology or business strategy, but the social codes I had observed at the gala. I watched videos of successful entrepreneurs giving interviews, paying attention not just to what they said but how they said it, the casual confidence that came from believing you belonged in any room you entered. I read profiles of venture capital partners and technology executives, studying the language they used to describe their work, their backgrounds, their vision for the future. By Thursday morning, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. The difference between old money and new money wasn't just about inheritance versus achievement. It was about the assumptions you carried into every interaction, the unconscious confidence that came from never having questioned your right to participate in any conversation, access any opportunity, demand any level of respect. I was about to test whether that confidence could be learned. Thursday evening found me standing outside the Union League Club, a building that radiated the kind of institutional authority that came from over a century of hosting Chicago's power brokers. Unlike the Hotel Gala, this venue made no pretense of public accessibility. This was a private club, membership by invitation only, the kind of place where business deals were finalized over dinner and political careers were launched over drinks. The evening's check-in process was markedly different from my previous experience. The staff member who greeted me was clearly trained to assess rather than accommodate, to determine whether each arrival belonged in this particular environment. When I provided my name, she checked it against a list with the thoroughness of someone whose job depended on maintaining exclusive standards. "Mr. Chen," she said, looking up from her tablet, "welcome to the Union League Club. This is your first Morrison Foundation mixer, correct?" "It is." She smiled, but her eyes were evaluating. "Wonderful. The foundation attracts such interesting young professionals. May I ask what brings you to the technology sector?" It was a test, disguised as small talk. The wrong answer would mark me as someone who didn't belong, someone who might need extra attention or gentle guidance toward appropriate conversations and contacts. "I develop enterprise security architecture," I said simply. "Currently focused on cloud-based protocols for large-scale implementations." The jargon worked exactly as intended. Her expression shifted to polite interest rather than continued assessment. I wasn't someone who needed management or explanation. I was someone who spoke the language of business and understood my place in professional hierarchies. "How fascinating. I'm sure you'll find several like-minded professionals this evening. The foundation attracts some of Chicago's most innovative young leaders." She handed me a name tag and directed me toward the cocktail reception, already moving on to evaluate the next arrival. The difference in treatment was subtle but unmistakable. I wasn't being tolerated or welcomed despite obvious disadvantages. I was being accepted as someone who naturally belonged. The club's interior was a masterpiece of understated luxury, all dark wood and leather, oil paintings and crystal, the kind of environment designed to make successful people feel comfortable while subtly intimidating everyone else. The cocktail reception was held in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Grant Park, where small groups clustered around tall tables while servers circulated with drinks and appetizers that were clearly several steps above standard event catering. The crowd was different from the gala, younger and more diverse but no less sophisticated. These were people in their 20s and 30s who had already achieved enough professional success to be considered rising stars in their respective fields. The conversations I overheard were about startup acquisitions and consulting projects, about graduate school connections and industry trends, about the kind of career trajectories that led to foundation board appointments and charity leadership roles. I accepted a glass of wine from a passing server and began to circulate, listening more than speaking, observing the social dynamics that governed these interactions. Unlike the gala's rigid hierarchy, this mixer operated on more fluid principles. Professional achievement mattered more than family background, though the two often coincided. Recent success was valued alongside established connections, though both carried more weight than potential alone. Within 20 minutes, I found myself in conversation with 3 other technology professionals, discussing the implications of IBM's recent security mandate with the kind of technical depth that would have bored most of the Gala attendees but energized everyone in this particular group. "The interesting question," said Lauren Kim, a consultant who specialized in enterprise software implementations, "is whether companies will try to develop these capabilities internally or license existing solutions. The technical barriers are significant, but so are the costs of external dependencies." "Most will license," I replied. "The development timelines are too long and the expertise requirements too specialized for internal solutions to be practical at scale." Michael Torres, who worked for a venture capital firm that focused on technology investments, leaned forward with interest. "You sound like someone who's been thinking about this market opportunity pretty carefully. Are you working on solutions in this space?" It was the question I'd been waiting for, the opening I'd hoped would emerge naturally from professional conversation rather than awkward networking attempts. "I hold several patents in cloud-based security architecture," I said simply. "Currently evaluating licensing opportunities with major implementation partners." The shift in their attention was immediate and unmistakable. Patent holders weren't just technology workers, they were potential business partners, acquisition targets, people whose innovations could drive industry transformation and generate significant returns for investors smart enough to recognize their value early. "Which specific areas?" Lauren asked, her tone shifting from casual interest to focused evaluation. I outlined the technical frameworks I'd developed, using the kind of precise language that demonstrated both deep expertise and commercial awareness. I wasn't just a researcher who understood the technology, I was an entrepreneur who understood its business applications and market potential. Michael exchanged glances with Lauren, the kind of wordless communication that happened between people who recognized opportunity when they encountered it. "Have you considered partnership opportunities with implementation firms? The market is about to explode, and the right collaborations could be extremely profitable for everyone involved." Before I could respond, a familiar voice interrupted our conversation. "David Chen. I certainly didn't expect to see you here." I turned to find Sarah Morrison approaching our group, looking polished and professional in a way that was more approachable than her gala appearance but no less impressive. She wore a navy blue dress that was elegant without being formal, carried herself with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in any professional environment. "Sarah," I said, maintaining the same casual tone I'd been using with the others, "good to see you again." She joined our circle naturally, clearly accustomed to inserting herself into conversations and being welcomed. "I don't think I've seen you at one of our mixers before. How are you finding it?" "Educational," I said, which seemed to amuse her. "David was just telling us about his patent portfolio in security architecture," Michael said, clearly hoping to continue our technical discussion. "Sounds like he's positioned well for the coming market expansion." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. "Patents? That's impressive. I don't think we covered your technical background when we spoke at the gala." There it was, the subtle reminder that she remembered me from the corner table, the implication that my background hadn't seemed worth exploring at the time. But her tone carried genuine interest now, professional curiosity rather than polite dismissal. "The conversation never really went in that direction," I replied evenly. Lauren looked between us with the kind of social awareness that came from navigating professional hierarchies successfully. "You two know each other from previous foundation events. We were undergraduates together at Northwestern," Sarah said, which was technically true but omitted the more relevant details about our recent interaction. "Though I have to admit, David, I don't think I knew you were working in technology development. That's fascinating." Michael was clearly eager to return to business discussions, but Sarah's presence had shifted the dynamic of our conversation. She wasn't just another young professional networking for career advancement. She was Sarah Morrison, daughter of the Foundation's founder, someone whose interest in any individual carried implications beyond simple professional connection. "David," she continued, "I'd love to hear more about your work. Are you familiar with the Foundation's technology initiatives? We're always looking for innovative partnerships with emerging companies. The irony was delicious. 3 days ago, she had introduced me to a ballroom full of people as a diverse face in the crowd. Now she was actively soliciting partnership opportunities with my company. The difference wasn't my technical expertise, which hadn't changed. The difference was context, presentation, the social signals that marked me as someone worth taking seriously. I'd be happy to discuss potential collaborations, I said, though I should mention that my focus is primarily on enterprise-scale implementations. The Foundation's needs might be outside my typical scope. It was a gentle deflection, the kind of response that suggested selective availability rather than eager pursuit of any opportunity. In the venture capital world, scarcity often increased perceived value, and I had learnt enough about business psychology to understand that appearing too available could undermine the very credibility I was trying to establish. Sarah smiled, clearly recognizing the dynamic I was creating. Of course, well, perhaps we could schedule a separate conversation to explore whether there might be mutual benefits worth pursuing. She handed me her business card, not the casual gesture of someone collecting contacts, but the deliberate exchange of someone offering access to decision-making authority. The card was heavy stock, minimalist design, contact information that included direct phone numbers rather than general office lines. Our conversation continued for another 20 minutes, ranging across technology trends, industry forecasts, and the kind of strategic thinking that separated successful entrepreneurs from talented engineers. I found myself holding my own easily, contributing insights that demonstrated both technical depth and business acumen, speaking with the confidence of someone who understood not just how to build solutions, but how to commercialize them effectively. When Sarah eventually excused herself to greet other attendees, Michael immediately leaned closer. "Do you realize what just happened?" Sarah Morrison expressed interest in potential business collaboration, I said, though I knew he was referring to something more significant. Sarah Morrison doesn't hand out her personal business card to people she's just met, Lauren added. I've been attending these events for 2 years, and I've never seen her initiate partnership discussions with someone who wasn't already established in her network. Michael nodded agreement. She's incredibly selective about professional associations. The fact that she's interested in your technology suggests either your patents are more valuable than you're letting on, or she sees market potential that most people are missing. Both assumptions were correct, though I wasn't ready to confirm either explicitly. Instead, I continued the kind of measured responses that had been working so effectively, providing enough information to maintain interest while preserving the mystique that seemed to be enhancing my credibility. The mixer continued for another hour, during which I found myself at the center of increasingly sophisticated business discussions. Word had somehow circulated that I was a patent holder with valuable intellectual property, and that information acted like a magnet for other professionals who understood the commercial implications of innovative technology. I exchanged contact information with venture capital associates, enterprise consultants, and technology executives, each interaction building on the previous ones to create a network of professional connections that would have been unimaginable just days before. More importantly, each conversation reinforced my position as someone whose expertise was valuable enough to warrant serious attention and whose business potential justified investment consideration. By the time the evening concluded, I had received 3 invitations to coffee meetings, 2 requests for detailed technical discussions, and 1 preliminary inquiry about licensing partnerships. Sarah Morrison had approached me twice more, each time with additional questions about my development timeline and commercialization strategy. As I prepared to leave, she intercepted me near the club's entrance. "David, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I'm curious about something. When we spoke at the Gala, I got the impression that you were relatively new to Chicago's business community. Tonight you're clearly much more established than I realized. Help me understand what I missed." It was a direct question that required a careful answer. Too much detail would seem defensive, while too little would appear evasive. I needed to provide explanation without apology, context without justification. I've been focused on development rather than networking, I said. The technology required several years of concentrated work before it was ready for commercial discussion. Now that the foundational patents are secure, I'm starting to explore partnership opportunities. She studied me for a moment, clearly trying to reconcile the person she remembered from the gala with the professional she'd encountered tonight. That makes sense, though I have to say, your timing is excellent. The market conditions for security architecture solutions have never been more favorable. I've been watching the trends. I agreed. I'm sure you have. She paused, then smiled. David, I owe you an apology. I think I underestimated you when we first reconnected. That was my mistake, and I hope you'll give me the opportunity to correct it. The apology was gracious and professionally appropriate, but it also revealed something important about how Sarah Morrison operated. She was pragmatic enough to acknowledge misjudgments when they threatened to cost her valuable opportunities, diplomatic enough to frame the acknowledgement as personal responsibility rather than mutual misunderstanding. No apology necessary, I said. First impressions can be misleading in both directions. As I walked back to my car, I reflected on the evening's transformation. The same technical expertise that had been invisible at the gala had become the foundation for serious business discussions at the mixer. The same professional background that had marked me as an outsider in one context had established me as an insider in another. The difference wasn't just presentation or preparation, though both had mattered. The difference was environment, audience, and the subtle social cues that determined whether expertise was recognized and valued or dismissed and overlooked. But more than that, the evening had demonstrated something I hadn't fully understood before. Social hierarchies weren't fixed or permanent. They were contextual and negotiable, subject to revision when circumstances changed or new information became available. People who had dismissed me based on surface impressions were perfectly willing to reconsider their assessments when presented with evidence of value they could recognize and quantify. The question now was how far I wanted to push that reconsideration and what I hoped to accomplish beyond the simple satisfaction of proving them wrong. My phone buzzed with a text message as I reached my car. It was from Peterson Dynamics, the venture capital firm Rebecca had mentioned. They had somehow learned about my attendance at the Morrison Foundation mixer and wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss acquisition opportunities. The message was brief but unmistakable in its implications. Word was spreading about David Chen and his valuable patents. The technology sector was beginning to take notice of innovations that could reshape enterprise security architecture. Investment firms were recognizing commercial potential that could generate significant returns for early stakeholders. I was about to become exactly the kind of person who had looked down on me just days before. The Peterson Dynamics meeting was scheduled for Monday morning in their downtown offices, 37 floors above the Chicago River in a building that housed some of the city's most influential financial firms. I arrived 15 minutes early, not from nervousness but from strategy. I wanted to observe their environment, understand their presentation style, gauge the kind of impression they were trying to create for potential partners and acquisition targets. The reception area was a masterpiece of understated power, all clean lines and expensive materials, designed to suggest both innovation and stability. The receptionist who greeted me was polished and professional, clearly trained to assess visitors while maintaining perfect courtesy. When I provided my name, her demeanor shifted to the kind of attention reserved for individuals whose time was considered valuable. Mr. Chen, welcome to Peterson Dynamics. Mr. Castellanos is looking forward to your discussion. May I offer you coffee or water while you wait? I accepted coffee, noting that it arrived in actual china rather than disposable cups, another small signal about how seriously they were taking this meeting. While I waited, I studied the displays along the walls, showcasing portfolio companies that had achieved significant market success after Peterson partnerships. The message was clear. They identified winners early and helped transform innovative ideas into industry-leading businesses. Robert Castellanos emerged from the elevator at exactly 9 o'clock, a man in his early 40s who moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected millions of dollars and numerous careers. His handshake was firm without being aggressive, his suit expensive without being flashy, his manner focused without being rushed. "David, thank you for coming in. I've been eager to discuss your work since Rebecca Martinez first mentioned your research." We rode the elevator to the 35th floor, making small talk about the Chicago skyline and recent developments in the technology sector. His office was corner-positioned with windows facing both east and south, offering views of the lake and the downtown business district. The space was furnished with the kind of pieces that suggested both success and good taste, professional without being ostentatious. "Before we begin," he said, settling behind his desk, "I want you to understand how we typically approach discussions like this. Peterson Dynamics specializes in identifying breakthrough technologies that are positioned to become industry standards. We're not interested in incremental improvements or niche applications. We focus on innovations that can reshape entire market sectors." I nodded, appreciating his directness. "What kind of reshaping are you anticipating in enterprise security?" His eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone discussing an area of genuine expertise. The IBM announcement was just the beginning. Every major corporation in North America will be implementing similar protocols within the next 18 months, either because of regulatory requirements or competitive necessity. The companies that control the fundamental architecture will essentially be licensing the digital infrastructure of modern business. He pulled out a tablet, scrolling through data that I assumed represented market analysis and financial projections. "Based on our preliminary research, your patent portfolio appears to cover critical components of that infrastructure. If our assessment is correct, we're not talking about a successful software company. We're talking about technology that could generate licensing revenue comparable to fundamental Internet protocols." The comparison was both flattering and sobering. Internet protocols generated revenue streams that lasted for decades, creating wealth for their creators that continued long after the original development work was completed. If Peterson's analysis was accurate, I wasn't just holding valuable patents, I was holding the keys to digital infrastructure that would underpin business operations for years to come. "What specific terms are you considering?" I asked. Robert leaned forward slightly, his tone becoming more confidential. "We're prepared to offer immediate acquisition at $75 million, plus performance bonuses that could reach an additional $50 million, based on licensing revenue over the next 5 years. Alternatively, we could structure a partnership arrangement where you retain ownership while we handle commercialization, scaling, and market development." The numbers hung in the air between us like a physical presence. $75 million, more money than I had ever seriously imagined possessing, offered for technology I had developed in a studio apartment while living on graduate student stipends and part-time consulting fees. But something in his presentation made me hesitate. The offer was substantial, but it was also immediate, presented with the kind of urgency that suggested Peterson Dynamics understood the value better than they were letting on. If they were willing to pay $75 million without extensive due diligence, the actual market potential was probably much larger. "That's certainly a significant offer," I said carefully. "What timeline are you working with?" "The market is moving quickly," he replied. "IBM's announcement has accelerated enterprise adoption schedules across the industry. Companies that wait too long to establish licensing partnerships may find themselves locked out of the most profitable implementation contracts." It was a subtle pressure tactic, designed to create urgency around acceptance without explicitly threatening withdrawal of the offer. I recognized the strategy from business psychology courses, the way negotiators framed decisions to encourage quick agreements that favored their position. "I appreciate the opportunity," I said. "Let me review the terms with my advisors and get back to you by the end of the week." Robert's expression didn't change, but I sensed slight disappointment. He had probably expected either immediate acceptance or extended negotiation, not polite deferral that suggested I had other options under consideration. Of course, he said smoothly, though I should mention that market conditions are evolving rapidly. The longer development teams wait to establish partnerships, the more crowded the field becomes. As I left the Peterson offices, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of the situation. Robert Castellanos wasn't just making an acquisition offer, he was competing against other firms who had also recognized the value of my technology. The urgency in his presentation wasn't artificial pressure, it was genuine concern that Peterson might lose access to patents they considered strategically essential. I was no longer the graduate student hoping someone would recognize his work. I was the holder of intellectual property that multiple firms wanted to control. That afternoon, I called Rebecca to discuss the Peterson meeting and explore what other options might be available. Her response confirmed my suspicions about the competitive landscape. "David, you've received inquiries from 6 different firms in the past week. Peterson was just the first to schedule a formal meeting. Goldman Sachs has a technology venture division that's expressed interest. There's a consortium of European investors asking about international licensing rights. Most interesting, though, is the inquiry from Morrison Industries. Morrison Industries, Sarah Morrison's family business, the corporate foundation behind the charitable activities that had brought us back into contact. I hadn't realized their business interests extended into technology investment. What kind of inquiry? They're asking about partnership opportunities that would align with their foundation's educational technology initiatives. It sounds like they're exploring whether your security architecture could be integrated with educational platforms they're developing for underserved communities. The irony was almost overwhelming. The family that had seated me in the corner as a charity case was now interested in my technology as a business opportunity. The foundation that had introduced me as a diverse face in the crowd was exploring partnerships that could benefit from my innovations. "Rebecca, I want to explore all the options before making any commitments. Can you schedule meetings with the other interested firms?" "Absolutely. Though David, I have to ask, what's your ultimate goal here?" "Financial maximization, technological impact, maintaining control over development direction." It was a question I hadn't fully considered. For 5 years my focus had been on developing the technology itself, proving that my theoretical frameworks could be implemented at enterprise scale. I had assumed that eventual commercialization would be straightforward, a matter of licensing patents to companies that understood their value. Now I was discovering that commercialization involved complex strategic decisions about partnerships, control, and long-term market positioning. The choices I made would determine not just my financial future, but my professional identity and the ultimate impact of my work. I want to make the decision that maximizes both impact and maintains my ability to influence how the technology gets implemented, I said finally. The following week became a series of meetings with investment firms, technology companies and corporate development teams, each offering different approaches to commercializing my patents. Goldman Sachs proposed a fund structure that would allow rapid scaling while preserving my research autonomy. A consortium of European firms offered international licensing deals that could establish global market presence. Several major technology companies discussed acquisition terms that would provide immediate liquidity, but transfer control to their development teams. Each meeting reinforced my understanding that I held something genuinely valuable, technology that could reshape enterprise security architecture and generate substantial revenue streams for whoever controlled its commercialization. More importantly, each conversation revealed different aspects of how business relationships actually functioned at this level of the economy. These weren't the polite social hierarchies I had observed at charity events. These were professional negotiations between sophisticated parties who understood exactly what was at stake. Status derived from capability rather than background. Respect was earned through demonstrated value rather than inherited through family connections, and power flowed to whoever controlled the most essential resources. The most interesting meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at Morrison Industries headquarters, a gleaming office tower that housed the family's diversified business interests. Sarah Morrison had requested the discussion personally, describing it as an exploration of strategic partnerships that could benefit both my technology development and their foundation's educational initiatives. The Morrison Industries building was impressive without being ostentatious, modern without being coldly corporate, designed to suggest innovation and social responsibility rather than pure financial power. The lobby featured displays showcasing their various business divisions, alongside information about their charitable activities, creating an environment where profit and purpose appeared naturally aligned. Sarah met me in the reception area, dressed in a charcoal business suit that was professional without being formal, authoritative without being intimidating. Her manner was focused and businesslike, a significant shift from the social charm I had observed at foundation events. David, thank you for making time to explore this opportunity. I think you'll find our proposal interesting from both a business and social impact perspective. She led me to a conference room where two other executives were waiting, Thomas Morrison, her father and the company's CEO, and Janet Rivera, the head of their technology investment division. Both greeted me with the kind of respectful attention that suggested they had done considerable research into my background and patent portfolio. Thomas Morrison was a man in his early 60s who carried himself with the quiet authority that came from decades of successful business leadership. Unlike the social persona I had observed at charity events, his professional demeanor was direct, analytical, focused on substance rather than ceremony. David, he began, we've been following developments in enterprise security architecture for several months, and your patent portfolio represents the most innovative approach we've encountered. Rather than simply licensing your technology, we're interested in exploring a partnership that could accelerate both commercialization and social impact. Janet Rivera opened a presentation on her laptop, projecting financial models and market analysis onto the conference room screen. Our proposal involves establishing a joint venture that would handle enterprise licensing while dedicating a percentage of revenue to educational technology initiatives. You would retain majority ownership of the patents while gaining access to our commercialization infrastructure and global business relationships. The proposal was sophisticated and comprehensive, addressing both immediate financial concerns and long-term strategic positioning. Morrison Industries would provide the business development resources needed for rapid market expansion, while I would maintain control over technology development and strategic direction. A percentage of licensing revenue would fund educational initiatives that used my security architecture to protect student data and online learning platforms. The financial terms, Thomas continued, would provide immediate compensation comparable to acquisition offers you've received, plus long-term revenue sharing that could significantly exceed pure licensing arrangements. More importantly, the partnership would give you platform to influence how your technology gets implemented across multiple market sectors. Sarah leaned forward, her tone becoming more personal. David, I have to be honest with you. When we first reconnected at foundation events, I didn't fully understand the significance of your work. That was my oversight, and it could have cost us the opportunity to explore this partnership. I'm hoping we can move past that initial miscommunication and focus on the potential benefits of working together. It was a more explicit acknowledgement than I had expected, recognition that their initial assessment had been incomplete and potentially costly. More than that, it was an implicit admission that social judgments, based on surface impressions, could interfere with business decisions that required accurate evaluation of actual capabilities. The meeting continued for 2 hours, covering technical specifications, market projections, partnership structures, and implementation timelines. By the conclusion, I had a comprehensive understanding of how Morrison Industries operated at the executive level, their decision-making processes, their strategic priorities, and their approach to managing complex business relationships. What struck me most was the complete absence of the social dynamics I had observed at their charitable events. There were no subtle hierarchies based on background or presentation, no condescending assumptions about capability or belonging, no casual dismissal of perspectives that didn't align with established patterns. This was purely professional interaction between parties who recognized each other's value and were exploring mutually beneficial collaboration. Thomas Morrison treated me as an equal partner in strategic planning. Janet Rivera solicited my input on technical decisions that would affect implementation priorities. Sarah Morrison acknowledged previous misjudgments and focused on future opportunities rather than past oversights. As I prepared to leave, Thomas walked me to the elevator personally, a gesture that conveyed respect while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. "David, I want you to understand something important about how we approach partnerships. Morrison Industries has been successful for 3 generations because we focus on long-term relationships rather than short-term transactions. If we move forward together, you're not just licensing technology to us. You're becoming part of our extended business family with all the support and opportunities that relationship provides." The elevator arrived, but before I entered, Sarah approached with a final comment. "David, regardless of your decision about our partnership proposal, I owe you a personal apology. The way you were treated at our foundation events was inappropriate, and it reflected poorly on my judgment and leadership. You deserve better, and I hope we can rebuild our professional relationship on a foundation of mutual respect." As the elevator descended, I reflected on the transformation that had occurred over the course of just 2 weeks. The same people who had dismissed me as a charity case were now courting me as a strategic partner. The same family that had seated me in the corner was now inviting me to join their business operations as an equal stakeholder. But more than that, I had discovered something unexpected about social and professional hierarchies. They weren't fixed or permanent structures based on immutable characteristics. They were dynamic systems that responded to demonstrated value, strategic importance, and the ability to contribute meaningfully to shared objectives. The dismissal I had experienced at charity events wasn't fundamentally about class or background. It was about context, presentation, and the failure of others to recognize capabilities that existed outside their normal frames of reference. When that context changed, when my capabilities became relevant to their business interests, the social dynamics shifted accordingly. The question now was what I wanted to do with that understanding. That evening, I sat in my studio apartment, surrounded by contract proposals from 6 different firms, each offering different approaches to commercializing technology I had developed in this same small space. The financial terms ranged from substantial to transformative, the partnership structures from simple licensing to complex joint ventures, the strategic implications from immediate liquidity to long-term market control. But beyond the business considerations, I was contemplating something more personal. I had the power to choose not just my financial future, but my social position, my professional identity, and my ongoing relationships with people who had initially misjudged my capabilities and potential. I could accept Peterson Dynamics' acquisition offer and disappear into comfortable anonymity, using the money to fund research that interested me without worrying about commercial applications or social recognition. I could partner with Goldman Sachs and enter the world of high-stakes technology investment, building a portfolio of innovations that could reshape multiple industries. Or I could accept Morrison Industries' partnership proposal and maintain ongoing relationships with people who had learned to respect my capabilities after initially dismissing them based on surface impressions. Each option would transform me into someone different, with different access to power, different social connections, and different opportunities to influence how technology affected society. The shy graduate student, who had been seated at table 47, no longer existed. The question was who I wanted to become in his place. On Friday morning, I called Rebecca to discuss my decision. I want to accept the Morrison Industries partnership proposal, but with modified terms that give me more control over implementation standards and a larger percentage of educational technology revenue. That's an interesting choice, she said. The financial terms aren't the highest you've been offered. No, but the strategic position is the most attractive. Morrison Industries has the business infrastructure to scale rapidly, plus the social connections to influence industry adoption standards. More importantly, working with them gives me ongoing opportunities to shape how my technology gets used rather than simply collecting licensing fees. And the personal satisfaction of working with people who initially underestimated you. I considered that question carefully. It's not about vindication or proving them wrong. It's about demonstrating that social hierarchies based on assumptions rather than capabilities are ultimately counterproductive for everyone involved, including them. The final negotiations took another week, but by the following Friday, I had signed agreements that would transform my modest patent portfolio into a joint venture worth an estimated $200 million over 5 years. More importantly, I had secured ongoing influence over technology development and implementation standards, ensuring that my innovations would be used in ways that aligned with my values and priorities. The announcement appeared in the business section of the Chicago Tribune the following Monday, a brief article about a strategic partnership between Morrison Industries and an emerging technology firm specializing in enterprise security architecture. The coverage was minimal, the kind of routine business news that attracted attention only from people directly involved in the relevant industries. But for me it represented something much more significant. The quiet graduate student, who had been dismissed at charity events, had become a technology entrepreneur whose innovations would reshape how major corporations protected their digital infrastructure. The man who had been seated in the corner had become a partner in one of Chicago's most influential business families. More importantly, I had learned that social hierarchies, while powerful, were not permanent. They could be challenged, negotiated, and ultimately transformed by people who refused to accept others' assumptions about their capabilities and potential. The following week, I received an invitation to the Morrison Foundation's annual board dinner, a private gathering of major donors and strategic partners. The invitation was addressed to David Chen, partner, Morrison Technology Ventures, and suggested seating at the head table alongside other foundation leadership. I accepted the invitation, then spent the afternoon shopping for a tuxedo. This time, however, I visited a custom tailor rather than a rental shop. The difference wasn't about displaying wealth or status, it was about presenting myself as someone who belonged in any room I entered, someone whose presence was earned rather than tolerated. The board dinner was held at the same hotel where I had first encountered the Morrison family's charity gala, but my experience was entirely different. I was greeted by name at registration, escorted to the head table, introduced to other board members as a valued partner rather than a diverse face in the crowd. During the cocktail reception, James Crawford approached me, the same man who had condescended to me so smoothly at my first Morrison event. His manner was entirely different now, respectful and genuinely interested in my perspective on technology trends affecting the charitable sector. David, I've been hearing remarkable things about your partnership with Morrison Industries. It sounds like your security innovations could revolutionize how foundations protect donor information and program data. That's certainly one of our goals, I replied evenly. Excellent, excellent. You know, I've been thinking that Crawford Industries could benefit from similar security upgrades. Perhaps we could schedule a conversation about potential consulting arrangements. It was the same man who had dismissed my understanding of computers just months before, now soliciting my professional services. The irony was perfect, but I felt no need to emphasize it. The transformation spoke for itself. During dinner, Sarah Morrison stood to make remarks about the evening's purpose and the Foundation's achievements over the past year. When she reached the section about new partnerships and innovative initiatives, she turned toward my table. This year, we've been fortunate to establish a strategic partnership with Morrison Technology Ventures, led by our friend and Northwestern alumnus David Chen. David's innovations in enterprise security architecture will not only generate revenue to support our educational initiatives, but will also protect the digital infrastructure that makes our programs possible. She paused, looking directly at me. David represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking and social commitment that our foundation was established to support. We're honored to have him as a partner, and we're excited about the opportunities our collaboration will create for communities across Chicago and beyond. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained, the recognition of colleagues who understood the value of what I had accomplished. But more than that, it was acknowledgement that I had earned my place at their table through capability rather than charity, through contribution rather than tolerance. As the evening concluded, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me from table 47 to the head table, from overlooked outsider to strategic partner. The transformation hadn't required me to abandon my values or compromise my integrity. It had simply required me to present my capabilities in contexts where they could be recognized and valued. The quiet graduate student still existed within me, along with his commitment to using technology to solve meaningful problems. But he was now accompanied by a successful entrepreneur who understood how social hierarchies functioned and how they could be navigated without surrendering personal authenticity. Walking out of the hotel that night, I realized that the most satisfying aspect of my transformation wasn't the financial success or social recognition. It was the understanding that dismissal based on assumptions rather than capabilities ultimately hurt everyone involved. The Morrison family had nearly missed out on a valuable partnership because they initially misjudged my potential. James Crawford was now paying premium consulting fees for expertise he could have accessed much earlier if he had bothered to look past surface impressions. Social hierarchies based on superficial assessments didn't just exclude capable people. They prevented organizations from identifying and developing the relationships that could drive their own success and innovation. The man they had tried to dismiss because his tuxedo was rented had become the partner they now courted because his patents were valuable. But the real transformation wasn't in my bank account or business relationships. It was in the understanding that respect based on capability was ultimately more satisfying than tolerance based on charity, and that the most effective response to initial dismissal was demonstrated excellence rather than resentment. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.